Hello. In this video, I will be covering part 1 of chapter 1, Choosing a Major for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. This chapter is basically designed to kind of ground you in what it means to be a psychology major or what it means to be a major in one of the fields that is connected to psychology, such as neuroscience or human development. But your authors kind of backtrack and say, but wait, you have a lot of decisions you can make in terms of why you're choosing the major that you're choosing. And you may also have questions that you've asked or that people that you know have asked about why would psychology be a good choice for you. So to start, we want to ask some grounding questions. Many people come into the study of psychology with some pre-existing attitudes and beliefs about what psychology is, what it's supposed to be. And we'll talk a little bit more about what psychology is, since there are so many misconceptions as we go through this opening lecture. Another grounding question is, what does someone trained in psychology do? And again, a lot of people bring to this question a lot of pre-existing attitudes and values and beliefs. And most of the time people land on the answer as being someone who provides psychotherapy services to other people. And what you'll find as you move your way through this course is that people who work in the helping professions as counselors, as clinicians, as psychologists, that's only a minority of the world of people who work in psychology. What kind of education and training do people in psychology have? What you're going to discover over the course of this class is that each job that is in many ways related to psychology is going to have somewhat different training expectations. For some jobs that are related to psychology, you can go straight out of high school and into those jobs. Other jobs require all the way up to a doctoral degree. So there's no one simple answer to this question. In fact, it requires that you look at every single job that may have some connections to our discipline and then ask, what does it take to do that job? Because, as I said, education and training background vary tremendously from one type of position to the next. And then, what can you do with a psychology degree? Of all the questions that I've gotten, mostly from parents, so when a prospective student comes in for a visit and they ask me, so what can you do with a psych degree? This is often a loaded question, I'll be honest. Sometimes people will come into a college visit and they'll have this image in their head of, you can't do anything with a BA or a BS in psychology with a bachelor's degree. And something you're going to learn over the course of this, taking this class, is that that's simply not the case, that there are lots of things that you can do with a psychology degree that do not require advanced degrees, that don't require a master's degree, that don't require a doctoral degree. So it really just depends on what your goals are and what you intend to do with your life beyond college. So we need to start by thinking about what exactly psychology is. And in our program at Mount Union, we have 3 majors. We have a major in psychology, we have a major in neuroscience, and we have a major in human development and family science. Your text, they're only looking at it from the perspective of what is psychology. So we'll start there. Psychology, probably the most commonly used definition, is that it's the scientific study of behavior, thinking, and emotion. Neuroscience is that branch of psychology that's kind of a hybrid between biology and chemistry and neurology and psychology. It's really the application of psychology to the study of the brain and the nervous system. human development and family sciences is kind of that hybrid between social work, sociology, and psychology. And as we move through the class, I will mention these other disciplines as we go through the various kinds of careers and try to point out when will neuroscience maybe be the most direct route into a particular career path? When will HDFS maybe be the most direct route to a career in this path? And I'll talk pretty often in lectures for the chapters where we're exploring particular career areas about that issue of what are the commonalities, what are the differences, and how may one or the other of our majors better prepare you for them. Your authors note that psychologists are scientists, and we're trained in the scientific method for asking and answering questions about the questions that are germane to the area. We're trained to create hypotheses, to use theory, to use scientific methodology to observe and collect data, to do data analysis, and so on. So we are a science, and we use scientific methodology just like any other science. One of the critical things that you're going to learn, and you probably already learned this in an introductory psychology class, is that psychology involves a whole lot more than just psychotherapy or just the study of abnormal psychology or psychopathology. If you remember back to your introductory course, each of those chapters is a sub-discipline of psychology, and in each of those areas, there are people who specialize in the study of those topics. So that'll be kind of a theme that runs through the course. The word psychologist can be used in a number of different ways. So we need to think about what that is, because psychologists are trained in many, many different ways, and they work in a lot of different contexts. Psychologists can be engaged in research, both in the academic setting, but also in the private sector, sometimes in government. They can be practitioners working in helping. And even among practitioners, there's a lot of diversity, many different kinds of practitioners doing different kinds of work. Some psychologists are consultants, some are teachers, etc. So there's a lot of different ways that psychologists can be trained, and they work in a lot of different capacities. Something that surprises a lot of students is that less than half of people who have a background in psychology are currently employed delivering services like psychotherapy and assessment. The other half are doing something else with their training. And you're going to learn as we move through each of the topic areas later in the course why that is, that just how much diversity there is in the work in these areas. About a third are in academia or other kinds of research settings, some in higher ed, some in the private sector, and so on. As I mentioned, there are a lot of different subfields in psychology. The ones that are highlighted in your textbook are depicted here in this table. And these are this is just a sampling. If you want to see all of the varied subfields, or at least one representation of them, you can go to the American Psychological Association website and look at all of the divisions, the membership divisions in psychology. I think they number somewhere in the 40s. And you'll see each of the different topic areas that are possible. So your authors are kind of picking their battles here and talking about behavioral neuroscience or neuroscience, where they're looking at brain behavior interrelationships, clinical psychology, looking at mental illness and treatments for emotional, behavioral, and psychological problems, cognitive psychology, which is the study of thinking and information processing and so on. Community psychology is an interesting field. It's really kind of at that intersection between public health and psychology, where you're looking at how communities are constructed and so on. Counseling psychology, like clinical, involves looking at psychological challenges that people have, but also looking at people when they're functioning in a healthy way. Developmental psychology is the study of human growth and development. Experimental psychology is a really broad area, and it can involve a lot of different subspecialties like sensation and perception being one, where it tends to be heavy on the scientific methodology side and research. Some other subfields that your authors give attention to: forensic psychology is one that I've had a lot of students interested in over the years, but it's also one that's deeply misrepresented in the media. Forensic psychology involves us applying psychology to the legal context. And one thing we'll find when we get into that chapter is it doesn't involve running down serial killers. But I'll let you know what it really is. Health psychology is a subdiscipline of clinical psychology that is directly related to the psychological aspects of health and wellness. Human factor psychology involves the interaction between people and the machines, the context, the buildings, the environments that they're in, and how they interact with products as well. It's a really fascinating field. Industrial organizational psychology is the application of psychological theories and ideas to the workplace. Quantitative and psychometrics involves measurement. So anytime you've taken a formal assessment, say maybe when you were in grade school, someone thought, oh, it's possible this is a person who could have ADHD. Let's do a test. At some point, a psychometrician or a quantitative psychologist was involved in developing those measures, those tools, and then validating them. Quantitative and psychometrics researchers also, they develop statistical techniques and mathematical ways of solving problems or addressing questions. School psychology is the application of psychology to the educational setting. In some cases, it's very academic. They're, doing research to ask and answer questions. And it can also be applied, where you have somebody working in the school setting on those issues. And then social psychology, which happens to be my home discipline, is the study of people in a social context. So we lay out these subfields just so that you can get an initial sense of the breadth of the field. Psychology is very multifaceted, and under each of these headings, there will be numerous branches, subdisciplines and subfields, and within each of those, there are different job and career opportunities. So when we think about careers for psychology majors as well as neuroscience and HDFS majors, there's some important caveats to keep in mind before we start our exploration of all the different possibilities. First off, most students who get a bachelor's degree in psychology, neuro, or HDFS actually do not choose to go on to graduate school. Instead, what they tend to do is take what they've learned and the skills that are acquired getting that degree directly into an entry-level position. So, for example, I've had a lot of students go straight into the business world, where they take what they learned in psychology and turned it into a sales position, or into an HR position, or into a research technical position. We have lots of students in neuro, for example, who really want to go into laboratory work. And so they take their undergraduate degree and they go straight into those working positions. So it's often a misunderstanding. Like, I've had parents come in on student visits and they're like, I've been told that you simply cannot use a psych major for anything, that you have to have a PhD. And I spend a lot of time kind of debunking that mythology and giving them specific examples of what students have done with their bachelor's degrees. About a quarter of undergraduate psych degree holders go straight to graduate school right after finishing their bachelor's degree. And a lot of these are students who they know what they want is to become a licensed counselor or a licensed clinician. And in the United States, in order to deliver psychological services, to deliver counseling, to do assessment and diagnostics, you have to have a license. And in order to get a license, it is typical that you will need an advanced degree or at least a certificate beyond the bachelor's degree. So in each of the chapters where we are exploring specific career paths, you will be given information on what are the prerequisite educational requirements for different kinds of job descriptions that are related to the topic area. Now, before we go any farther, we're talking about bachelor's degrees. In addition, what are the kinds of advanced degrees that people who are interested in psychology can pursue? Master's degrees are typically about 2 years. They vary a little bit in terms of the timeline. Some are accelerated programs, some are 100% online, some are 100% in person, some are a hybrid of those two. If the master's degree is in a clinical or counseling area, there is typically an internship that comes after the classroom portion of that program, and then licensure exams, because you have to meet the requirements of licensure through your state. Doctoral degrees vary in terms of how long they last. As it says here, 4 to 7 years. And you might be asking yourself, why the 4 to 7? Well, the 4, like my PhD program was 4 years, because I'm not a clinician. I wasn't going into counseling. I wanted to teach college. So in that case, you do 4. Some people did 5 years. I think the norm was 5 years for experimental programs. The 6 and 7, that tends to be clinical and counseling programs where people are doing an internship experience and getting their hours that will lead then to licensure for delivering psychological services. So there is a fair amount of variability there in terms of the number of years. The doctoral degrees, there are options there, and the most common is the PhD, and that is a research-oriented degree. If the PhD is in clinical or counseling, it's kind of a scientist practitioner kind of approach, where you're trained as a scientist, but you're also trained as a practitioner. The PsyD degree is relatively newer. It's described as a professional degree. So this type of doctoral degree is far less invested in research and teaching, and really focuses most of the work that the student is doing on becoming a clinical counseling school psychologist. Again, the emphasis would be on skill building, getting those high quality internships, and then passing licensure exams. The EDD is another type of doctoral degree, coming not out of a psychology program, but out of an education program. And students are often surprised that there is some overlap there. Counseling psychology has tended historically to either be through psychology programs or through education programs, historically more on the education side. And clinical psychology has tended to have its home almost exclusively in psychology programs. And I'll talk more about that when we get into that chapter, because that's kind of confusing, and it has a lot to do with just differences of philosophy and purpose. So we'll talk a little bit more about, what that EDD degree might mean. Typically, it's a person who's working in an education context as a researcher, administrator, as a professor. But there are those who have EDDs who then go on and get clinical or counseling licensure, typically counseling licensure, and work in that space as well. And that concludes my coverage of part 1 of chapter 1.